thank you for giving me the chance, Civic Tech TO for Canada, for the opportunity to talk to you guys today. I'll start with a little bit of background about me before I then get into my main presentation, which is how in diplomacy we've been able to use technology to achieve certain goals of foreign policy. I came to digital diplomacy, which is the sort of chapeau that we use for describing any use of technology in diplomacy. As very much not a technologist, I studied international relations, political science, both the undergraduate and graduate level. I joined Canada's Foreign Service in 1993, back when, if you're an idealistic young bachelor's student, recent graduate from a bachelor's degree, and you wanted to change the world, diplomacy seemed like the sort of most obvious profession that's been supplemented, I think, by many other professions since then. And I focused on the Middle East. I was always interested in human rights and democracy, and the Arab world in particular really caught my fascination early on. It was a time of great contrast and contradictions in international relations, at a time when there was very widespread human rights abuses in Egypt, the first country where I was posted, in the middle of the Mubarak years, and yet a very close partner of Canada, the United States, and other countries. And I found that whole tension between the close relationship we had with the Egyptian government and their widespread and systematic abuses of human rights problematic, but also fascinating. The challenge that it presented to us as representatives of the Canadian government. No interest and no involvement in tech whatsoever, until I started seeing that the subjects that I was most interested in, which were human rights movements in the Arab world, were starting to exercise considerable influence and power in their own countries, mobilizing on a vast scale, using technology, not exclusively because of technology, but there's certainly something dramatically different that starts happening in the Middle East with the Green Movement in Iran in 2009, and obviously the Arab Spring in 2011 and onward. I've been interested in, so I came to technology essentially because I was interested in the capacity of very large groups of people to organize amongst themselves without governments or any formal political institutions. What I'll do right now is sort of a quick run through of 3 different experiences where we use technology in order to advance human rights goals. Essentially, each one of them had three ingredients. There was a large pool of individuals that were seeking some kind of change. There was a tool that we were able to offer to them to channel some of their desire for change in a coordinated fashion. And third, there was some basis of legitimacy for us to be engaging in this effort. It was different depending on the experiments that we ran. So I'll start with Egypt, because having been posted to Egypt as a diplomat in the mid-1990s, as my very first diplomatic posting, I got to know some of the issues and the players, some of the challenges of that country, and some of the obstacles to achieving better human rights and democratic aspirations of the Egyptian people. So when the Arab Spring hit Egypt, about 15 years later, in 2011, I happened to actually be at Stanford University on a sabbatical, studying the use of technology in what they were calling the Liberation Technology Program at the time. So I was able to come to the Egyptian case from the perspective of someone who knew the politics and the players and the social dynamics, and coming new to the technology. I was doing so as a Stanford University researcher. I was outside of government at that point, and so it was on the basis of learning what seems to work in mobilizing large groups of people for action that we were operating. The tool that we built in this case, there were a series of hackathons held at Stanford University where we would bring Egyptian democracy activists to the Bay Area so that people that wanted to make some kind of contribution to human rights and democracy in the Arab world could do so by building the tools that the Egyptian democracy activists were imagining. There were several that we built, but the one that got the most traction was a crowdsourced approach to drafting the constitution of a democratic Egypt. So we essentially built a wiki. It wasn't actually a wiki, but the idea was that there was a mass writing exercise by tens of thousands of Egyptians writing what they would consider the ideal constitution for their country, particularly the dimensions that protect human rights. And what was interesting in that from a political perspective was that you had this crowd of, I think we had 18,000 users eventually, that would have these debates online, as people do in a sort of Wikipedia context, debating which rights matter more than others or how you should balance certain rights, which should be priority over others. For those of you who are interested in the tech, we did this using IdeaScale, which is, I'm surprised to see it's actually alive and years later. The problem that we faced with that, and the reason that I'd say it failed, is that we weren't able to achieve scale. 18,000 people is not too bad for sort of the first foray into the use of technology for human rights promotion. And we did it entirely in Arabic. We managed to build it partially through a community like you, but in Stanford with not only coders and designers, but also a lot of Arab Americans who were able to learn their language skills. And so it was a really community-built project. But we only got 18,000 users in a country of 80, 90 million. It just wasn't enough to keep it going very long, particularly in a highly tumultuous environment. Obviously, that Egyptian revolution was in a very hopeful period in 2011 when we were working there, and it became a lot darker later on. For the second experiment that we ran, where we tried to use technology, I was actually back inside the Canadian government, back at headquarters. Still interested in the Middle East, but this time I was shifting my focus to Iran. And I was preparing for a posting to Tehran when the Harper government pulled the rug from under my feet and closed our embassy there, which from a career perspective was terrible. And I was pretty excited about the opportunity to actually live in Iran. But from an innovation perspective, it was interesting. Often when you place a constraint, it creates an opportunity for greater innovation. In this case, the innovation that was being, the opportunity for innovation was that the government, which was then led by Stephen Harper, was anxious to promote human rights in Iran, had some crazy ideas about how to do so, dangerous ideas about how to do so, but was no longer able to do so in a bricks and mortar embassy. So the sort of traditional tools of the trade of actually having Canadian government workers on the ground getting to know people and undertaking advocacy and doing marshalling the government and all the sort of traditional toolkit of diplomacy was no longer available. But this was a time when there was a lot of interest in the potential of the internet for promoting human rights, and so we were given a mandate in the Middle East Bureau of using technology. So what we did in that particular case was we partnered with members of the Iranian diaspora in Canada, the United States, Europe, and in the Middle East and Asia to create a global dialogue on the future of Iran. We partnered with the circumvention technology, which many of you will know, Siphon. It's here in Toronto. And any Iranian users, internet users that were using Siphon in order to access the free internet would be directed to a website where they could be invited to share their political opinions or their opinions on anything. The whole idea was to help Iranians enjoy their freedom of expression. If they were being denied it in their day-to-day lives inside the country, they could do so online in an anonymous, safe environment on the internet. And we ended up reaching about 5 million unique users inside Iran in the 6 to 9 months of this series of web properties called the Global Dialogue and the Future of Iran was up and running. So where we had failed in the Egyptian experiment in achieving scale, we'd accomplished it inside Iran. The principal problem I would say that we encountered with the Iranian work was impact. Because this is diplomacy and not other parts of what governments sometimes do, we needed to be radically transparent and to have absolutely no control over what was happening inside this conversation. Our goal was to create the conversation, create the conditions for the conversation, and invite Iranians to manage the conversation in any way that they saw fit. The idea was they would be speaking in their own words, in their own language, in their own terms, about their country, because that's something that they're not able to do in the physical space. Right. And that was our goal, was just that there be a conversation. In some sense, that it's an exercise of human rights, just to be able to have a conversation. But what we noticed is that many of the people participating in that conversation wanted it to lead to something. And we decided it wasn't going to be up to us to decide what to lead it to. So we decided not to get into any community management whatsoever. So some people were frustrated that it was a lot of talk for no particular outcome. And then inevitably there were certain groups of people advocating for certain outcomes. And because we weren't censoring the content whatsoever, the community took on a life of its own. And many of the people in that discussion started advocating for change in Iran. It had not been a regime change initiative, but many people used the freedom to start talking about changing government and about the policy of the government of Canada. I think that that failure of ours to try and identify what impact there should be beyond having a conversation came with us. I'm also acutely conscious that when you're trying to promote human rights in other countries, it does represent change in that country. And ultimately, the impetus for change in any society must come from the people of that country. I believe we were able to do so from the perspective of the government of Canada, and that we were quite clear not to direct how people were to use their newfound freedom to discuss matters online. But I was always conscious that there's a potential limitation to your legitimacy when you're helping people in other countries affect some kind of change if you are working for a government. And so I sought the opportunity to leave the government of Canada to work in a way that wasn't constrained in any way by what the foreign policy of the government in Ottawa might be. I had been working with the same partner through these various experiments, a fellow bureaucrat, fellow public servant called Farhan Al-Hani. Because I don't know tech at all, he was a friend of mine that knew the most about tech. He was a digital communications whiz, was the first person in the government, in the Canadian Foreign Ministry to use Facebook as a means for engaging foreign publics back in 2007. He was in our embassy in Washington. And when we had met, we were actually working in Kandahar, and he'd even been able to come up with some innovative technology solutions to the challenge of engaging the citizens of Afghanistan with the government that we were trying to. So a phenomenally innovative public servant, and I managed to convince him to renounce his government career and join me in the private sector. So we launched a company, which we now call Betterplace. In 2016, Farhan started working on it full time in 2016, and then I had one last assignment in me, which was as Canada's ambassador to Venezuela, which finished in 2017. That's when I joined Betterplace full time. We decided to locate to Toronto. We got accepted into the Mars Venture Services program, and we were based there today. I'm glad to say we have one of our employees here, Adam Al-Masri, who's our principal engineer, who joined us in late 2018. So once we were sort of into year 2, now been with us for almost a year. So the third experiment that I'll mention is in the context of Betterplace, what we were able to do as a private for-profit company. Well, a company that eventually aspires to get some profit. We're a social enterprise, and that's always been a big challenge. In 2018, we noticed some of the same dynamics that we had seen in the Middle East with large groups of citizens that were determined to achieve some kind of change in their country, and were frustrated by the existing mechanisms for changing the political system. That was the progressive movement in the United States after the election of Donald Trump. We picked one particular state where the progressive movement was extremely strong, and where there were a lot of very tech literate people that were not traditionally involved in any kind of civic action or any kind of politics, but were coming out of the woodwork. Regular citizens trying to take some responsibility for what was happening in their country, and because this particular state, Washington, is very tech savvy, very open to using a new platform. So we deployed Betterplace there in February of 2018. Betterplace is a mobile app for personalizing opportunities, specific action to each individual. Essentially, if there are crowdsourced campaigns for civic action, they tend to be organized around a specific cause or a specific organization. We created one platform that was open to any progressive cause and had a wide range of different micro-tasks available for individual citizens. And then our aim was to try and personalize some of those opportunities to each individual based on 3 questions. What do you care about? What kind of contribution would you like to make, and where do you live? So we had causes in there related to environment, we had causes related to voting rights, we had causes related to anti-racism, combating Islamophobia, and to gun violence. And this was just weeks before the Parkland massacre. And while we were there in market, the March for Our Lives movement exploded, and every major city in the United States decided to launch their own march on March 24th, the March for Our Lives. We were able to convince one of these groups of high school students in an otherwise very pro-gun, very Republican, very red part of Eastern Washington, called Spokane, to use Betterplace as their tool for organizing their march. The kinds of micro-tasks that they loaded up into our software were become part of the organizing committee, design a sign or paint your own sign, put up posters around the city to get the whole community out to the march, clean up after the march, undergo media training, so if you're interviewed by CNN at the march, you know what to say. And one of the ones that most impressed me the most was engage in peacemaker training. So if someone from the NRA shows up and tries to disrupt the march, you can engage them in you can diffuse the situation in a peaceful and nonviolent manner. Actually, had more people sign up for that than almost any other task. The march went ahead on the 24th of that month, and based on the metrics we were able to gather, we believe that group of high school students was able to triple the number of volunteers working to organize the march, and collectively they were able to organize the second largest march in the recent history of Spokane, Washington. The first largest being the Women's March of January 2017. So I think we were able to solve in the Washington deployment of Betterplace the problem that we had with the Iran project, which was impact. We were able to draw a pretty direct line between the activity of the people actually using our app with something that's changing in the whole world. They were able to have a real show of force for gun safety advocates, even in the heart of NRA territory in Eastern Washington. The problem that we faced in that last experiment that I mentioned was sickness. That people were quite willing to participate in the lead up to the march. We managed to get something like 42% of the people who registered for an account on our platform to complete an action. We had a means to validate whether the action was completed. About 1 in 7 went on to conduct another task, often for completely different issues. They would come there for gun violence or gun safety campaign, and then they would go off to an environmental or LGBTQ rights task or some kind of cross-pollination system. But it was really difficult to get people to the third, and by the fourth or fifth time, just forget it. It was very little recurring action, and very difficult to keep the ball rolling on us about people coming back to your cause. And if it's going to take 14 high school students massacred to motivate them, it's not a great way to build a business. It was a very exhilarating time. It was a very meaningful time, and I think the people that were working with us and designing the software were really felt that they were contributing to something. We have not yet figured out how to keep the community coming back over. So our latest attempt is something called the Gratitude Project, and I will be pitching for your support later on for those of you that would like to help us build this. We've been looking at what is the experience, the spark that will motivate people to come back over and over and over again to engage in civic action. And we have discovered this not through any kind of brilliance on our own part, but just by sheer trial and error, having been at this for several years and seeing examples where people are fired up to take action and to keep at it month after month, and through some of the highs and lows that inevitably come with political action or civic action. And where we had been looking primarily at the role of the people taking action, we realized that the genesis for taking action might actually come from the human connection you have with those that benefit. So if you're providing services to a refugee group, the refugee who's actually receiving the support could provide the impetus for people to get involved. There's a very simple way that this can be transmitted, which is through a simple message of thanks. Where we had been looking at microtasks before, can we thinking about minimizing the amount of time or effort or risk that anyone has to put into taking action. We now have been looking at more significant forms of civic action and volunteering in particular. And the hypothesis that we have is that if you take people that have volunteered once or only very intermittently, and you expose them to a personalized message of thanks from someone that has benefited from their volunteering, that their likelihood of becoming a recurring volunteer increases dramatically. To do this, we're going to be partnering with several organizations across the GTA. We have identified organizations that provide services to identifiable beneficiaries. So there's someone to film saying thank you. That rely primarily on volunteer favor, so there's a volunteer to send the message to. And that are willing to work with us in introducing us both to people to be filmed saying thank you and to the volunteers, and to participate with us in the learning process. Survey the volunteers afterwards to see what kind of what has been accomplished. So we're calling this the Gratitude Project. It's in some sense building on all of the other experiments that we have conducted for Hacknight over the last 8 years of using technology to mobilize individual citizens for greater collective action. And I'll save my pitch till later on, but I hope that some of you will be able to join me in building the platform that we'll be using for this Gratitude Project.
Thanks, Ben. So we normally have time for a few questions.
Yes, first question. Government well? 2017, summer 2017. About 2 years ago.
The other thing, what decides, like I like you know, just throwing electrons on each other, hands up. What decides on when we group together? Let's say you don't like that. You know, an example would be on the other right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of backlash. Those people get together on the pushing people. Do you get them out, or do you just?
Yeah. I'll repeat the question just in case those of you in the back didn't hear. It's a really very pertinent question, which is, if I can paraphrase it, if you're creating tools that citizens can use to advance some kind of change, make it beneficial. What do you do when people use that for purposes that you don't agree with? And it's not an easy question to answer, because one answer might be just do that every single cause. Not only is that not very scalable, but it's also not very legitimate. If you're arrogating to yourself the decision of who gets to use the power of this collective action being made possible by your tool. You also don't want to have a free-for-all. You don't want to have neo-Nazis using something designed to help enable anti-racism organizations, for example. So the answer that we come up with is that we identify a set of values right from the beginning for the community of users, and they sign on to that as they become part of the community. And then we delegate to the community the vetting of causes. So we came up with 4 principles for the Betterplace community. The first one is that you cannot use this to advocate violence or to threat to violence. You cannot use it to break the law. You cannot use it to contravene anyone's human rights. And
That's what the fourth one is.
here's the fourth one. Well, we actually ran some focus groups to see if those would be understandable to the community and if they would successfully vet out. We went through an exercise where we imagined offensive causes trying to take advantage of the platform and seeing if they would be vetted in or vetted out. It wasn't a foolproof system, but I think we were able to demonstrate that you can, in fact, trust the community to make those decisions as long as you've been quite clear about the principles from the very formation. So the example I gave. So the example, the example Yvonne gave is that in Colombia they just had their first Pride March. I hadn't heard this, but there was quite a lot of, I guess, homophobia. In response to this.
It's not, I would call it home. I spent 2 years.
Yeah.
They're kind of, I don't care. Think large group was upset at the fact that it was being short as opposed to. And you start getting back on track. A lot of friends in Colombia on Facebook. I'm getting
So let's see, just to make this a case study here, let's imagine that there was some, what's the group here, the Proud Boys? Like some homophobic group in Colombia that decided to organize a campaign to harass marchers at a gay pride or whatever. They would have to propose actions that would then be uploaded as tasks in our platform, and those tasks in that campaign would actually have to be vetted by other users of Betterplace. And on the, discrimination, that was it. Discriminate, and that would have been the principle in which the homophobic campaign would be.
Other questions? Peter, I saw your hand first.
Are you aware of the current situation in Hong Kong?
Yes.
To what extent you believe project or the concept would work in Hong Kong?
So the question is, to what extent could this concept, I assume you're not meant for our specific platform, but coordinated civic action, coordinated through technology, might be effective? Yeah. I guess at one level I would argue that tech-enabled civic activism is a part of every major human rights movement now because we interact with each other as human beings, whether we're in Toronto or in Hong Kong through technology. And so I haven't been following these protests in Hong Kong that closely, but I'm absolutely positive that they're using technology to organize them. And inevitably, whenever you're able to get 1 million people to the streets, that is a tremendous show of power. And so the citizens of Hong Kong are exercising their collective power, and they're doing so partially through technology. Whether they will be able to achieve their goals depends on a few things. First of all, what goal they set for themselves. And so more recently with the, I'm sure if you saw the news over the long weekend, but the protesters actually broke into the legislative council, like the Parliament of Hong Kong, and started busting up the place. So if their goals are to achieve some kind of radical change in the political structures of Hong Kong, that probably isn't going to pass. If their goals, however, are to constrain the ability of Beijing to impose changes to the constitution or to the rights that Hong Kong people achieve, I do believe that they are creating some kind of constraint.
Well, I ideas.
Can we continue the conversation?
Or 100% Hong Kong citizens. It's only a small group. But on the other hand, it's growing. But on the other hand, it's not a completely human rights situation. Although the service is combination versus capital and human rights versus behavior. Having said that, it's very much a political primarily aroused by a small political group, homegrown, and at last it was the student body, the young audience, who are highly straightforwardly and naively immature. So having said that, that's basically global Chinese, maybe hopefully I am right, global Chinese outside Hong Kong is what we really wanted to present.
Yeah.
We're
So
gonna
I just wondering.
I won't get into details.
So you can keep talking because Ben's hanging around.
Yeah, I have 1 45-second video to show at the very end, so about a minute before you want to cut this off.
Okay, I'm gonna say we have time for one more question, and then video, and then we will continue with Josh or Sawyer.
So you talked about the Spokane experience.
Yeah.
And how you were able to find some metrics about how there had been some like, tripling of action or doubling of this kind of action. What kind of baseline did you use? Yeah.
So I'll do a quick answer, Peter, before we have a private conversation, which is we're in a new world about the political power of regular citizens. And we saw it in the Arab Spring. We've seen it in the election of Obama in 2008. Something like Trump in a very different way in 2016. We are only just beginning to see what happens when 7 billion people have some kind of political power. And I think there's going to be some really serious ups and downs. And every time there's a crisis in a place like China, we should be watching to think, what does that mean for what's going to happen eventually in our country? I don't have the definitive answer, but I know we are on a massive learning curve, and it's going to get very messy. All the more reason for us to do what we're doing tonight, is to engage together to try and figure out how to use technology for good, because there are definitely going to be lots of people. To your question, how we were able to measure, we were lucky in that the high school students that used Betterplace for organizing their March for Our Lives didn't fully trust this unheard of technology from another country. They just, met me a few days before. So they actually conducted the organization of their march in 2 ways. One of them was using Betterplace, where they were uploading actions and then promoting through social media and just letting the crowd organize itself, our vision. And the other was much more traditional. They went to each of the high schools and they just collected with clipboards, and they collected the names of people to volunteer. And so that gave us something to compare against. We know that they were able to get 40 volunteers through their clipboard method, and they were able to get 119 through our method. That's the basis on which we were able to say that we were able to more or less triple the number of people involved. Okay, so with that, we will play this. This gives you a sense of what the Gratitude Project will be all about.
One when I came here, I came to the class with me, and friendly technology is really amazing. So I thank you guys, and I've gotten spiritual help, I've gotten a family that I never thought I have. I'm really grateful, and from Margie, I am working, and through her resume assistance, I wouldn't have been able to do this. And from Brenda, she educated me on how to settle, finding a place, and also being part of a community. I am grateful about this, and thank you.
So this is Josie, who is an LGBTQ refugee from Nigeria, who was helped by a volunteer called Margie. We're going to send that video to Margie and observe the impact that it has on her approach to volunteering. If you're interested in that, please let me know. Thank you.